Hi, this is chapter 7 of Graham the Gargoyle, Graham's Grief. Warm heart, warmer wisdom. Graham listened carefully to the rest of Flynn's volcano presentation at dinner. Thanks to Flynn, he had outwitted his enemy and had a blord-free day at school. He was happy. As soon as his sister finished her presentation, he stood and clapped proudly for her. That was excellent, Flynn. You're a volcano expert, Graham offered. He's right. You are quite the authority on all things volcanic, dear. Their mother looked surprised at Graham's enthusiasm, but didn't see fit to press the matter. Thanks. Miss Brennan wants me to share it with the level 2 students on Friday. I can't wait. She neatly stretched a wawa vine around her note cards and returned them gently to her backpack. What's for dessert, Mom? Graham asked as he spooned the last of his second helping of mucka root stew into his mouth. He hoped she had made his favorite brumbleberry muffins. His grandfather said the berries helped with wing growth, and Graham needed all the help he could get in that department. Now, you know we don't have dessert until your father gets home. She stole a glance at the clock above the kitchen window. I didn't think he had any meetings tonight, but maybe I'm wrong. He should be home soon. In the meantime, someone under this roof hasn't had any of my delicious stew. Anyone want to feed him? She motioned with her head to the hall containing their bedrooms. I'll do it. Graham rushed to the kitchen and fetched a bowl before his sister could swallow her mouthful and volunteer. Even though he undertook this task most nights, he was still quite possessive of it. He valued the time he spent with his favorite family member. He ladled a sizable helping of stew into the bowl and darted down the hall. Their mother shouted at him as he entered the second bedroom on the left. He already has a drink, but he might need a refill. Okay, Mom, thanks. Graham closed the door behind him and approached the immense bed situated under the room's only window. The curtains were pulled shut, and the only light came from a will-o-wisp dancing about in a large antique globe. Ragged breathing came from the bed's sole occupant. Graham climbed up on the stool placed at the side of the bed, being careful to not spill any of the hot liquid on himself or the elderly gargoyle stretched out before him. Grandfather, I brought you stew. The glass sat on the side table, still filled with water. How are you feeling? The aged gargoyle turned his head and slowly adjusted himself so he was sitting up in bed. He moved stiffly. The bed creaked its protest under the shifting weight of the hardened gargoyle. I'm doing just fine. It wouldn't be much longer. Warm brown eyes stared at Graham from deep-set sockets. Wrinkles looking more and more like cracks radiated from the corners of the gargoyle's heavily lidded eyes. His grandfather's most distinguishing feature was not the bleached horns that jutted down from his narrow chin like the tendrils of a wise beard, but rather the gentle smile that spread across his face at the sight of his grandson. It lit up the room far more than the luminous light pixie housed in the globe. You look good, Graham smiled weakly. He hated lying. His grandfather looked even worse. It was obvious he had hardened much more since yesterday. His skin appeared as coarse as sandpaper, and slight cracks at his joints were beginning to paint an unsettling picture. You should eat. Thank you. His grandfather slowly pulled the bowl of stew from Graham and placed it on his stomach, balancing it with one hand while fumbling with the spoon in his other. The fingers looked the most like stone. Gray had crept in up to his knuckles, overtaking his grandfather's normally robust orange complexion. As the weathered hand closed around the spoon, Graham thought he spied dust escape from the cracks ringing the joints of each finger. Your day was good? His grandfather asked. It went fine. Hot and I got top marks on the geometry quiz. That's good to hear. I love that plucky troll friend of yours. The gargoyle slurped some of the stew, then said, Anything else noteworthy happen? Well, Graham wanted to tell him about Lord and Mount Prometheus. He wanted to share how he and Ott had outwitted the bully. He wanted to, but didn't. He didn't even want to talk about Milan. Instead, he steered the conversation to something his grandfather knew well. I know you've told me all about Malcolm Parsons before, but you've never told me if you knew him or not. Wasn't he around when you were younger? His grandfather slid the spoon out of his mouth and placed it back in the bowl. He cradled the bowl on his stomach and licked his lips. The second task, much more of a chore than a pleasure. Once, your grandmother and I met him and his family shortly after he was run out of office. Oh, Graham hoped for more details. His grandfather exhaled slowly and surveyed Graham, looking him up and down. We bought salk beans from him on that occasion, bitter food in the hand of most, but your grandmother creamed them into a delicious casserole with Varna loaf. She even sent Malcolm's wife a sample of her handiwork along with the recipe. I suspect the farmer enjoyed that meal as much as I did, but you aren't asking about him to hear the details of swapping recipes, are you? Graham fidgeted. Here he was, about to sprinkle another lie into his conversation. Who wouldn't he lie to anymore? First his mom, now his grandfather? Well, I went over to his plateau this morning to see the sunrise. After listening to Flynn fill me in on Mount Prometheus, I wanted to get another look at it. Almost as an afterthought, he added, Malcolm's statue is pretty nifty. His grandfather said nothing. Graham looked down at the quilt draped over the gargoyle's lower half, uncertain what to say next. You want to know how I feel about what he did? His grandfather asked. Uh-huh. You've told me about him over and over, but never told me how you feel about him staying in Cascade. He couldn't believe he was doing this. His grandfather needed rest, not badgering. That'd be what his father would have to say about Graham's bold conversation. His grandfather said, crossing over is a very personal journey. Climbing to the top of a church and declaring yourself its protector is deeply honorable. He paused to catch his breath. Many will tell you Parsons knew nothing of honor, that his decision to stay in Cascade was selfish. His grandfather's words seemed to linger in the air. He was a wise man. Graham leaned forward and inhaled slightly, hoping wisdom was contagious. Malcolm was honoring his new home. In a way, he is the most noble protector of us all. From his final resting spot atop the plateau, he greets each day with hope and wards off the everyday evils that attempt to enter our village. Graham grinned. He certainly did that for me. Maybe it had been a good thing his encounter with Blort had been in the presence of the statue. Was it wrong for me to go there? The council doesn't approve. His grandfather chuckled. No, it shows you have courage, that you seek your own answers. Don't ever tire of that, Graham. He took a sip of water and returned the glass to the side table. His movements were painfully slow. Anything else? Are you scared about crossing over? Do you not want to go to your final resting place? Is that why you haven't gone yet? Graham, I'm not afraid. I'm waiting for the last possible moment in the hopes that I will get to see my only grandson do his family proud and take to the air. I want to watch you touch the clouds for the first time this Friday. That's why I'm not crossing over. He cleared his throat. As for not going to my final resting spot, that's not the case. My body might be perched atop a church tower, but I'll never leave your side. He wanted to ask his grandfather about Malcolm and whether or not a calcified gargoyle, one who had stood in place for more than 20 years, could bend their arms or wink, but he didn't. He sensed his grandfather was drained and needed rest. He leaned over him and placed his head on his grandfather's shoulder. The aged gargoyle smelled of flint and sandstone. What if I can't fly? What if my wings are too small? I don't have enough courage. All the other kids keep telling me they're brave and walk around acting like they're going to soar high. A tear escaped and splashed onto his grandfather's chest. For a comforting second, Graham imagined the tear having magical powers and turning the stony body into its younger, less hardened self. His grandfather pulled him closer and whispered, Bravery lies not in the saying, but in the doing. Anyone can talk about having courage, but you don't truly know if it's in you until the moment it's required. No one can spot a brave soul. Graham sniffled, attempting to hold back his worry and frustration. His grandfather placed the bowl on the side table and rested a reassuring hand on Graham's cheek. Unless, of course, they happen to be a wise grandfather who is attuned to the unique vibrations valor gives off in a young man or woman. You have it all over the place. His grandfather bucked his torso several times, shaking Graham repeatedly to drive home his point. It's so corked up in you, it's trembling to break free, Graham. Graham giggled and playfully batted his grandfather's hand away, fearing he was about to be tickled. Grandfather? Yes? Do you mind if I rest in your bed next to you for a while? Not at all. The elderly gargoyle lifted the quilt, allowing Graham to snuggle closer. For Graham, the world seemed a little more understandable and a little less complex and terrifying, if only for this one evening.